Good evening, everyone. I'm Carmi Garzione, the Dean of the College of Science, and I just want to thank you all for joining us here for our fourth and final lecture of the 2026 College of Science Lecture Series. Before we begin tonight, please join me in giving tonight's musician, Bailey Zick, another round of applause. Well, it's hard to believe. This is the final lecture of 2026. But I just want to thank all of you who've joined us for the 3 enlightening lectures that preceded this month from Dr. George Sutphin, Dr. Martha Bhattacharya, and Dr. Lise Marie Imbert-Gerard. And we have an excellent lecture for you tonight in Laura Condon, who's a member of our hydrology and atmospheric science community, and that lecture is going to be special. It'll include many other scientists. I also just like to take a moment to recognize the Galileo Circle members in the audience tonight. The Galileo Circle is a community of individuals whose support is vital to the continued excellence of the College of Science. Thank you for your continued support of our students, faculty, and staff, and for being here with us tonight. And I'd like to thank Arizona Arts Live for their continued partnership with the lecture series and for helping us bring this lecture series to life every year here in Centennial Hall. I'd also like to thank our partners for the lecture series, in particular our presenting series sponsors, the Marshall Foundation and Research Corporation for Science Advancement, and our series sponsors, Holualoa Companies, O'Reilly Chevrolet, South 32, Tech Launch Arizona, Tucson Electric Power, TMC Health, and Visit Tucson. We are deeply grateful for your support. And as you've heard and experienced throughout this lecture, the College of Science is proud to continue its collaboration with the University of Arizona Poetry Center for this year's series. In the spirit of reaching broad audiences through diverse platforms of communication, a poet reads an original poem crafted for our lecture topics. Tonight's poet is Allison Hawthorne Deming, a Regents Professor Emerita of English from the University of Arizona. Allison has been recognized with fellowships from the Guggenheim and Borchardt Foundations, as well as from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Arizona Science Commission on the Arts. Deeply invested in the relationship between art and science, Allison's most recent book of poems is Blue Flax and Yellow Mustard Flower. We are delighted to have her here with us tonight, where she will read a poem that shares the title with tonight's lecture. Please join me in welcoming Allison to the stage.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here to help celebrate the important and inspiring science that gets done at the University of Arizona. Earth's story. Even a soul submerged in sleep is hard at work and helps make something of the world. Heraclitus. Sitting in the living room after dinner with friends, a man who traveled the world consulting Marsh Arabs and Marshallese Islanders to learn what it takes for a person to persist at the practice of kindness in a world of ruin. A woman who makes bird masks the size of human heads, shrike, roadrunner, turkey vulture, and sets them up so a person can walk into a bird's head and imagine seeing through those eyes. We fell into conversation. What is a soul? Why do we need that concept when no one can say what it is? We agreed that the dog resting his head on the man's knee has a soul. To be alive is to be ensouled. Can a planet have a soul? Can it feel soul sick at its wounding the way we do, facing the brutalities of a government turned against its people? We griped that AI kept bullying our devices, how often it got things wrong, and how it could not have a soul because it could have no experiences, no feelings, no savoring. Stories were what we wanted because they make us cry or rejoice or remember the dead or know that we truly care about another's suffering. No story more vital than Earth's accounting of itself, which we can read in mountains and rivers, in the faces of our friends, each of them a brief assemblage of molecules that understand how to stick together. Thank you. Thank you.
That was a wonderful way of weaving so many of the themes that we're going to hear tonight in tonight's lecture. So let's thank Allison again. And I'd now like to introduce tonight's featured speaker, Laura Condon. Laura is professor of the Department of Hydrology and Atmospheric Sciences at the University of Arizona. And tonight, we're going to try something completely new for the first time in 2 decades of the history of the lecture series. Throughout the lecture, Dr. Condon is going to be joined on the stage by fellow faculty members, Dr. Tai Foray, Dr. Hoshin Gupta, Dr. Bo Guo, and Dr. Andrew Bennett, as well as PhD students from the Hydrology and Atmospheric Sciences Department, to discuss the increasingly important role of human interaction in an evolving world with artificial intelligence. And as for Laura's research, she studies large-scale water sustainability and watershed dynamics in a changing climate. She leads multiple projects to develop national water simulations for forecasting capabilities with a special focus on groundwater. Laura is a fellow of the American Geophysical Union, a recipient of the McElwain Medal for early career contributions in earth sciences, and a Galileo Circle Curie Award winner in the College of Science. And she also received an NSF Career Award. She also serves on multiple national and international committees and on data stewardship, cyber infrastructure, and large-scale modeling. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Laura and members of the Hydrology and Atmospheric Sciences Department to the stage.
Consider a candle. For thousands of years, they were a primary source of light for humanity. They were essential, but they were everyday items. And yet, in 1848, Michael Faraday, one of the most famous scientists in the world, gave a series of 4 hours of lecture on candles. Hundreds of people attended. So consider a candle, a source of light, yes, but also a symbol of human curiosity and of the power of telling scientific stories.
Tonight, we're going to tell a different story, the story of the Earth. And what I hope you'll see is that this is really a testament to our ability to develop collective reasoning and an illustration of the ways in which basic science serves as the bedrock of modern society. But where will our story go next? I'm sure you've all heard about the power of artificial intelligence and the promise it holds to improve seemingly all aspects of our lives. Will it accelerate scientific discovery too? I certainly hope so, but only if we continue to build our collective human intelligence and understanding, because this is the bedrock of our ability to move forward. Now, before I get too far ahead of myself, I should point out that Faraday got 4 hours just to explain a candle, and I only have less than 1 hour to explain the entire Earth. So I hope, yeah, it's a lot, but don't worry, we have a team. I hope you don't mind. I brought some friends, so you already heard from Ty Foray, and throughout the rest of the night, you'll be hearing from other members of our hydrologic reasoning intentional research community. We are a group of faculty and advanced PhD students in the Department of Hydrology and Atmospheric Sciences. We get together to discuss big questions in the future of Earth science. Tonight's talk is a reflection of some of those discussions. I also want to point out that we all do our own research. We do work to try to understand water quantity and water quality and protect the resources that we all depend on into the future. You're going to see a few highlights of that tonight, but unfortunately we won't have time to get into too much details. So please just trust me when I say it's really cool stuff. Okay, so back to our story. Now, you might be wondering why I keep saying story. That sounds kind of warm and fluffy for a scientist, right? We're supposed to deal in cold facts and objective truths. But what I want to convince you of tonight is that science is a story. It's just a special kind of story. It's built using the scientific method and designed to be testable and buildable. It's been written collectively by all of human civilization over thousands of years. No one knows the whole story, but we all know some of it. So to start off tonight, I'd like to ask you to take a moment and picture the Earth. You have it in your heads? Okay. So I'm guessing most of you got this. Maybe some of you got this. Partial credit if you had this. You can see me after. We'll talk a little bit about where you went wrong. But the point is that all of you got some sort of a blue ball. And this is interesting because the Earth as we experience it, unless we have astronauts in the room, is really pretty flat and green. And this is more than just a picture that you saw online. This is a concept we all have in our head. We understand that the Earth is a blue planet orbiting the sun. So what I want, and maybe this isn't the most important information in your head right now, probably where you parked your car tonight is more important to you in your immediate future. But the point I want to make is that this isn't just an idle curiosity that you all could summon this idea in your head. This is really a demonstration of our ability to build stories together. So to understand how we got there, let's go back to a point in time when we didn't all have this picture in our heads. How did we get to where we are today? The answer starts with curiosity. We are curious creatures. Anyone who has ever spent time with a toddler knows this. But honestly, as adults, we still have lots of questions. We just don't feel the need to say them out loud all the time. Why is the sky blue? Where does the rain come from? Why don't the clouds fall down on our heads? Why does the sun rise every day? The answers to some of these most basic questions first came in the form of stories.
So humans have been creating stories about the sun for about the past 6,000 years. The oldest known folktales and artifacts date back to about the Bronze Age, when myths were woven deeply into the fabric of everyday life, and they served as explanations for natural phenomena. For example, ancient civilizations created stories about the journey of the sun across the sky. In Egypt, the sun was worshipped as the supreme god Ra. By day, he traveled across the sky to bring life, warmth, and growth. And at night, he descended into the underworld to do battle with the god of chaos, Apep, defeating him so that the sun could rise again the next morning. On the other hand, the Greeks personified the sun as the god Helios, who drove a fiery chariot across the sky, bringing light and reason. These stories reflect a universal human tendency to want to have explanations for things. And of course, they were helpful. The apparent path of the sun across the sky helped to define the seasons, The sun was central to calendars and navigation, and helped to guide ceremonial and agricultural practices. But they were stories without scientific basis. They gave some reasons why, but were based in human authority rather than in empirical fact. The thing about modern science is it's not enough to just have a good story. All of our explanations must be based consistent with empirical observations. The 17th century marked a fundamental shift away from authority-based knowledge towards scientific explanations, physical and mathematical models, which began to replace myth. I've lost my prompter up here. So they began to replace myth. Galileo famously remarked, I guess we'll wait for that, we'll wait for the screen to come back. I'll do that again.
From the top.
So the 17th century marked a fundamental shift. It was the so-called Age of Enlightenment, marked a fundamental shift away from authority-based knowledge towards scientific explanations, physical and mathematical models that began to replace myth. Galileo, whom I'm sure you've heard of, famously remarked that philosophy is written in this grand book, the universe, which stands continually open to our gaze. But this book cannot be understood unless one first learns to comprehend the language in which it is written. It is written in the language of mathematics. Of course, our growing confidence in the ability of human reason to uncover the laws of nature was often in conflict with traditional authority. That might seem a little familiar. But humans are curious, and we persist. We continue to seek explanations, better and better explanations for things, because we really want to know the reasons why.
This want to know is the bedrock of science. The fact that the sun rises every day is one of the most predictable things in your life. You really don't need to know why to go about your daily life. But we are curious. We can't help it. We want to know why. Being curious is not enough, though. There are lots of animals in the world that are curious, and I'm sure wonder about the sun, too. And yet we are likely the only species on the planet that knows why the sun rises. Science is how we get to that answer. We make observations. We come up with ideas. We do analysis and tests to see if our ideas will work out. And we come up with explanations. And the key about these explanations is that they are put forward in a way that can be shared with other people and tested. Of course, if you're paying attention to this story so far, though, you know that this illustration is much too simple. It's really lots of people around the world having lots of ideas and making different observations across generations. The way that we advance is not just by one person, but by one person connecting ideas of other people and bringing their own creativity. And this is really hard. Even that basic fact that we all started with, the fact that the Earth is round, took us thousands of years to prove. The Greeks first proposed this in 400 to 500 BC, but it wasn't until Magellan circumnavigated the globe that we could really prove that it was true. I'll note that we also proved this without satellites. The fact that we could accomplish this is what makes humans special. In his book, Max Bennett describes human as the hive-brained apes because we have a unique ability to accumulate shared ideas, knowledge, and concepts and thoughts across generations. Science is a collective story. So maybe it seemed trivial when I first asked you to picture the Earth. But if you think of it in this light, it's very meaningful. This is an idea that was built across generations that we now all share together. And this is how discovery and progress has played out for centuries. We can figure out really big things because we have the ability to make collective observations and reasoning. This is also how we figured out the way that atmospheric circulation works.
So the image that you see here depicts the jet stream. It's a powerful atmospheric phenomena that drives weather around the planet. To understand and tell the story of how we learned about the jet stream, we need to go back centuries. So I'll start the story in the 1600s, when a series of devastating weather events led to widespread crop failure and famine in Europe. Scholars trying to understand what was going on noticed that these weather events were linked to low-pressure weather fronts. However, they didn't have the technology to be able to predict these. Nature gave us another clue as to what was going on with the jet stream in 1883 when the eruption of Krakatoa occurred. The plume of ash and debris that was sent into the atmosphere didn't simply dissipate evenly. People around the planet noticed that the plume moved in very distinct pathways. Of course, they still didn't quite have the technology to go up into the atmosphere and measure what was going on and what was driving these patterns. But with the dawn of aviation, we were finally able to go up there and see what was going on. In the 1920s, Wasaburo Uishi was launching weather balloons, and he tracked them as they rose 7 miles up into the atmosphere. Occasionally, what he found was they would hit these patterns of extremely fast winds, over 200 miles per hour, racing from west to east in these narrow bands. Oishi had found the jet stream. Meanwhile, aviators were also encountering the jet stream firsthand. In 1933, Wiley Post was attempting a high-altitude flight around the world. He noticed that around 30,000 feet of altitude, he was running into strong headwinds that nearly put his plane at a standstill. He had flown into the jet stream without knowing it was there. This significance began to be better understood during World War II, where American pilots flying missions over Japan found that depending on the direction of their flight, they could gain or lose hundreds of miles of range. So meteorologists worked to understand this, and by the war's end, the jet stream was recognized and understood as an atmospheric phenomena. In the following decades, transoceanic flights provided thousands of new data points, and now we understand the jet stream, how it seasonally migrates, and its relationship to weather patterns and role in steering storms across the planet. All of this is a key understanding that drives our ability to make modern weather forecasts.
In this story, too, we see a long story that is playing out over centuries, requiring observations that were taken at different points in time and across the world. Another key aspect of this story and the previous story is the relationship between prediction and understanding. What you see in both these stories is it's actually often much easier to make a prediction than to understand something. Take the sunrise, for example. We already talked about this. It's very easy to predict that the sun is going to rise tomorrow. It's been true for everyone here every day of your life and for every single one of our human ancestors every single day of their life. And yet, if you want to understand why the sun rises, you actually have to have a pretty advanced understanding of planetary motion. The same thing is true for the planes. Once you fly enough flights, it's easy to predict that a plane will fly faster in one direction than another. But to understand why required us to have a full understanding of atmospheric circulation. And that understanding is incredibly valuable. Predicting that planes will go faster from one direction to another is useful for planning plane trips, but not really for that much else. Understanding that it's the jet stream that drives this behavior and allows us to predict atmospheric rivers and weather fronts. The understanding is the beginning. It's the part that builds. Anytime we address a problem, we're starting from centuries of previous research and understanding. This is true for scientists, but it's also true in your daily life. Think about the last time you got sick. Did you think about some punishment from the gods? Depending on how sick you were, you probably did. But then after that, you probably thought about disease transmission and germs. These are actually pretty advanced scientific concepts. They're the pillars of modern medicine, and you understand them quite easily. This is true for scientists, too. When we're trying to understand something, we never go back to zero. We stand on top of all of the understanding that has come before. We could only figure out that we were looking at the jet stream when we saw it because of all the things we understood already. So science is definitely cumulative, but it's not straightforward. This looks like a staircase here, but we're not ever building a staircase with a specific destination in mind. Rather, we're just building pieces. Our job as scientists is to distill information in a way that can be shared. These are our building blocks, but we often build these building blocks of understanding without fully understanding what they will be used for. And some of the most important blocks were created trying to build something else entirely, or just making an interesting observation. This next story is an example of that.
In the early 1960s, weather forecasting was just beginning to use computers. At MIT, a meteorologist named Edward Lorenz was trying to make better weather forecasts using a very simple model of the atmosphere, with a few equations describing something like how warm air rises and cool air sinks. The computer was enormous and filled a room. It had printed long columns of numbers onto a paper. One day, Lorenz decided to rerun a simulation. Instead of start from the beginning, he typed in numbers from a previous printout. Here's the subtle detail that changed everything. The printout numbers were slightly rounded. Imagine something like 0.506 instead of 0.506127, a difference so small that we normally would just ignore it. Lorenz expected the new run to match the old one. In the beginning, it did. Then the two simulations began to drift apart, slowly and steadily, until they looked nothing alike. Lorenz assumed something was wrong. He checked the computer, he checked the equations. Nothing was broken. There was no randomness added. And the rules were precise, yet prediction diverged. That was the discovery. A system can follow exact rules, but still can become unpredictable. Not because it is random, but because it is extremely sensitive to where it begins. To understand, so basically, tiny errors do not stay tiny. They amplify until the prediction breaks down. To understand this more deeply, Lorenz plotted the full system over time, not just specific air temperature, wind speed, but the full condition of the model atmosphere over time and track them, okay? What appeared was a strange, beautiful structure. Two looping wings, the butterfly attractor. The system never repeated itself, but also never flew away. It remained confined within a structure, yet forever changing. That's where the phrase butterfly effect comes from. Not because butterfly literally cause storms, okay? But because in such systems, even the smallest uncertainty can put hard limits on how far into the future we can predict. Here's the deeper lesson. Lorenz was not looking for chaos. He just wanted to improve the weather forecast. He saw something that did not match his expectation, and he refused to ignore it. Chaos began with a rounding error. It ended by changing how we understand prediction, uncertainty, and the living complexity of the Earth itself.
It's a little crazy when you think about it, that one person made an observation that fundamentally changed the way that we understand the Earth. But if you've been paying attention, you realize it's not that surprising. This is how our system works. It's never one person making an observation. It's one person armed with centuries of scientific discovery. The discovery of chaos happened because one curious human was armed with a computer and centuries of atmospheric research that were boiled down into 3 equations that he was able to understand and solve. All of this only works because we are building a collective story. It took thousands of years to prove that the Earth was round, and hundreds more to piece together our understanding of atmospheric circulation. And yet, it only takes you about 18 years to learn the basics of physics, biology, algebra, and chemistry. It takes doctors roughly another 10 years to make it to the frontiers of their field and be ready to contribute. All of this works because we create a shared understanding that can build. Okay, so this is really cool and beautiful. Of course, the scientists think this is really cool and beautiful, but so what? Do you really care, right? Beyond it being cool. Yay, science. But what I'd like to point out is that it is not just medical doctors that can save your life. Earth scientists can save your life too, and I'd like to show you how. This is a picture of Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina, but it's a little hard to see because it's buried under Hurricane Florence. This is Wrightsville Beach on September 14th, 2018, the day that Hurricane Florence made landfall. Here's a picture of the same location 2 weeks earlier, when you can see that the weather is pretty unremarkable and the seas are calm. And yet, on that same day, more than 3,500 miles away, a tropical depression was forming all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. More than 3,600 miles away. That's more than the entire distance across the United States. So at this point in time, scientists already started tracking this storm. One week later, this had become Hurricane Florence. It was still 1,300 miles off the coast of the United States, but because scientists were able to provide accurate predictions of where the storm would be heading, they were able to issue evacuation orders. We've lost our screen again. We have bad luck with this screen. Are you guys getting? I can ad-lib, but I don't think you'll like it. Hold on. Oh, we're back. Okay, well, we're back to the hurricane. So remember, bad news, hurricane. Okay, let's go back a little. Okay, so 1,300 miles off the coast, we're able to make a prediction. The point is that we can't avoid the hurricane. The hurricane is coming. But because of our modern prediction systems, we can provide 1 to 2 weeks advance warning that the hurricane is coming, which does save lives. Before we had these systems, we were lucky if we would get one day of warning. Maybe we would get none. Okay, so how do we do this? The first answer, you'll probably guess, is satellites. We have some pretty amazing satellites. We can take images of the Atlantic Basin once every 30 seconds and provide real-time tracking of storms. We also have another fleet of satellites that creates a full 3D image of the moisture and temperature of the entire global atmosphere 14 times a day. This gives us incredible insights into the current state of the atmosphere, but it is not enough to tell us where storms will go. If you want to do that, then you need to combine our satellite observations with numerical weather models. This is what a numerical weather model looks like. We divide the Earth into a series of grid cells, and in each of those grid cells, we solve these equations for the motion of water and energy throughout the atmosphere. And this may look really complicated, but really what we're doing is just solving this picture. This is our understanding of how water and energy move through the system. The equations are just the ways that we record that understanding so that we can solve it with computer models. I also like to point out that whether you're using equations to do this or a picture, figuring out the answer is very difficult. In 1922, the first numerical weather forecast was completed. It was for just 6 hours ahead at 2 individual points, and it was calculated by hand. It took 6 weeks to complete, and unfortunately, both due to the timing, which made it not very useful. It was also not very useful because it was wrong by 2 orders of magnitude. So think the difference between 2 and 200. So we realized we really couldn't do this by hand. It wasn't until we started having computers that we could really do this for real. It still took some work, though. In 1950, the first numerical weather forecast was completed with a computer. It took more than 24 hours to complete this forecast. Again, a little to be desired. But fast forward to today, we now have the global weather forecasting system. This system creates 2-week forecasts 4 times a day, completing 10 quadrillion calculations in just under 2 hours. That is pretty impressive when you think about it. But yes, it's not my work, but yeah, thank you. Thank you for the weather forecasters. It's a lot, but is this just number crunching? I want to point out that no, there's a lot of basic science at the heart of this system. Think about a satellite. A satellite is not a thermometer in space. Satellites are measuring the radiation of water molecules. We have to understand how water behaves on a very fundamental level for anything we see in a satellite to make sense. Our numerical weather models, as I already mentioned, are just simulating our conceptual understanding of how the atmosphere works. You already heard from Andrew's story about all it took to build up that story. It's pretty incredible what we can do, but we still have a lot of work and a lot we don't understand. Faculty in our department do work to try to improve the ways we can use satellites to measure rain and other parts of the hydrologic cycle. They're even working on ways that we can link satellites together to create detailed 3D maps of rotational wind velocities to provide better predictions of extreme storms. I study the way the rainfall that they measure interacts with the landscape. I quantify where the water goes when it rains, how it gets underground and connects back to the land surface. I co-lead a multi-institutional project called HydroFrame. We develop advanced models of the entire terrestrial hydrologic cycle. What you see here is an output from our simulations. In the top, you see precipitation, and down below, you see the resulting stream flow and water inundation in pink that happens. Like the weather models that I already talked about, this is based on our physical understanding of how water and energy move through our systems. And like the weather models that I already told you about, it's a ton of calculations, roughly a billion calculations per every hour of simulation. What I'm not showing here is that our simulation also covers all of the groundwater motion that happens beneath this picture. Our model is the only model in the United States that covers all of these systems together. And this is really important because did you know that 99% of our unfrozen fresh water is actually underground? This isn't just a reservoir underground. It's moving and exchanging with the land surface. If you want to understand stream flow and water availability, you have to understand groundwater. This is something that our department specializes in.
Dr. Jane McIntosh and her research group study the deepest and hardest to access groundwater system in the world. They try to understand how deep fresh water goes below surface, how long it takes water to circulate deep underground, and what type of reactions it has with rocks and minerals, and where these deep stores of water and solute come out from the surface. This is really hard because we cannot just watch the ways groundwater flows the same way we do in river, and often take decades to thousands of years for the water to make its way from where it infiltrated at surface to where it comes out from the surface or ocean, and some may never will. So how do we do this? Dr. McIntosh's group take water samples from wells that reach deep, deep underground. They use advanced chemical and analytical methods to figure out the age of the water, where it comes from, the dissolved mineral picked up, and pathways that's taken. That's a lot of things that we can figure out from just some water samples. And this is really important because by understanding these deep water resources, we can better understand the other uses of subsurface, such as energy production, extraction of critical minerals, geothermal heating, and the storage of waste products like carbon dioxide. Beyond all of these applications, there is still a lot of mysteries in the subsurface, like some of the most extreme microbial communities live in very deep groundwater systems. Who knows what we might discover if we can learn more about them.
Speaking of small things that are hard to see, you have probably heard about the concerns about forever chemicals getting to our drinking water. These chemicals, known as PFAS, are used in every day, from non-sticking pan to firefighting foams. PFAS will end up on land surface and then move downward in the soil to contaminate the groundwater. But predicting their movement in soil is challenging. Unlike the conventional contaminants that only dissolve and move along with water, PFAS can stick to the soil grain and the interface between air and water. The degree of this sticking depends on the physical and chemical interaction among PFAS, air, water, and soil. This sticking and moving process cannot be seen because PFAS molecules are incredibly tiny. A PFAS molecule is 100,000 times smaller than the width of the human hair. To put that in perspective, that's like comparing a single hair to a Songchuan bus. To understand and predict PFAS movements, our research group have developed the world's first mathematical model. The model provides guidance for remediation and helps ensure that our drinking water stays safe for our community.
So recently, AI, also called machine learning, has been helping us do a lot of this faster. I'm not talking about the chatbots you might be thinking of, though. You know, the ones that are doing my homework or acting as your therapist? No. What I'm talking about are a very general set of tools that excel at learning relationships from data. So, for example, if you had a bunch of information about rain, temperature, and stream flow, and you gave it to a machine learning model, that model can learn to make predictions about stream flow it hasn't seen, given just rain and temperature. And an example of a very common type of a machine learning model that you have probably heard of is called a neural network. These neural networks learn by having each circle or neuron make a calculation and pass it to the next layer until at the end, they've arrived at their prediction. And when you hear talk of training these neural networks, what we mean is we are allowing them to learn through repetition. We show many, many, many examples where we already know the answer, and they have an internal process to slowly adjust the calculations the neurons are making until eventually they've gotten good at making these predictions. This training is very expensive, it's very slow, but once it is done, it is very cheap and very fast to make new predictions. We would like to point out, though, that this is fundamentally different from when we make predictions based on physical laws we've discovered, say Newton's laws of motion. It allows us to be very flexible about the type of system that we make predictions in, but we are left with a lot less knowledge about how we are arriving at the answers that we are getting.
Because we are not constrained by needing to know the equations of a system, this approach can be applied to almost anything. Actually, the large language models, the things ChatGPT use, are a specific type of neural network designed to understand and predict human language. Neural networks come in all shapes and forms, and they can handle really huge problems. Actually, inside a neural network, neurons are essentially transforming a problem into a very high-dimensional space. Thinking in that high dimension allows neural networks to make connections and match predictions that we cannot see directly. The thing that is really, really powerful about these models is that because they have so many learned parameters, they are infinitely flexible to adapt to different problems, even the really complex ones. For example, the original ChatGPT model used 175 billion parameters. And ChatGPT 5 uses more than 1 trillion parameters. That is the superpower of neural networks.
In earth science, machine learning models can help us to solve complex problems. And they are also helping us to obtain products we cannot generate with traditional approaches. In the image I have in my bag is one example of this. This is a high-resolution map of groundwater depth generated by the HydroFrame team. This is the most detailed groundwater map ever developed in the US. It will be too costly to obtain this using physical simulation, but it's possible with machine learning. We can also use machine learning to accelerate models. In this example, a neural network was trained to mimic the behavior of the hydrological simulation that Laura just showed you. But with this model, we can obtain results 100 times faster. And do you remember the example of the hurricane? This is an atmospheric river forecasted by a machine learning model released by NOAA a few months ago. This model does the same thing as the model that Laura showed you, but it used 99% less power and runs faster.
Sounds pretty incredible, right? So does this mean that all of our problems are solved? I wish, but probably not. So let me ask you another question. Where would we be today if we had our modern machine learning models and AI tools when we first started doing numerical weather forecasting? Do you think you would still be able to check the weather on your phone? My answer is probably yes. As long as we were still able to launch satellites, we have a huge amount of data to learn from. And we already see from the last example that machine learning models can do great in this area, connecting the dots. But would we have been able to discover the Lorentz attractor? Maybe not. The thing is that Lorentz figured this out because he was working with 3 equations that he understood. And when their behavior started to diverge from his expectations, that's when he knew he needed to start digging. He wanted to know why. Lorentz started out in what we traditionally think of, where we use our understanding to make predictions. That's what he wanted to do, and to potentially improve his understanding and improve those predictions further. But his story is also an example of the way that this can work the other direction. Because when the behavior started to diverge from what he was expecting, he learned new things. And this created a feedback loop that is constantly expanding our conceptual understanding. So the question is, could we do the same thing with a machine learning model? So let's remember what Ben told us. Machine learning models don't have equations. They're just learning relationships between inputs and outputs. And they're very, very good at this. But the thing that they learn on the inside of the neural network is not the equations. We don't get equations out of them. The reason for this is that neural networks think in a high-dimensional space. Essentially, you can think that they're thinking in a language that we will never be able to speak. So in this model, if you see a mismatch between your predictions and what you're expecting, you know that you need some improvement in your model, maybe some more data or a different architecture. But the fundamental difference here is that the gaps in prediction tell you about the gaps in the machine learning model's understanding and not the gaps in our own. And so in this paradigm, we have an opportunity to vastly improve predictions, quite rapidly too, but not improve our own understanding along the way. So what? I mean, if we can still check the weather on our phones, you guys are doing pretty good in your lives without understanding the Lorentz attractor until now. So maybe this is just academics clinging to relevance and a need to understand. And what I'd like to point out, though, is that we don't all have to understand the Lorentz attractor. You are doing fine without that understanding. I hope you find it interesting, but you'll be okay. But the point is that some of us have to. And the reason is because the Lorentz attractor tells us a really fundamental truth about how the world behaves. It goes much beyond a weather forecast. It tells us the predictive limits of the Earth. It tells us about our climate stability and what we might expect in the future as the Earth starts to change. This is a beginning, not a prediction. And we need more beginnings right now. It may seem like we've made a lot of progress. We saw a lot of that tonight, and it's true. We have learned a lot of really cool things. But I should probably point out at this point that this image is not to scale. The real answer is something like this. Probably even worse, but I wanted you to be able to see it. We're at the bottom. We know enough to know that there is much more we don't understand than we do. I showed you some of the work that we're doing at the University of Arizona to progress basic science and try to fill our gaps of understanding about the water cycle. But that's just one little corner of the world. Everywhere we look, there are big unanswered questions. We don't know how quickly plants will grow in a warmer world. We really need to understand this if we're going to predict how global carbon budgets will evolve. We also don't know the stability of our current climate state and if or when major ocean currents might collapse. This would severely disrupt rainfall and weather. While we're at it, we actually don't know where all the water on Earth even came from, and for that matter, if life started on Earth or was delivered by meteorites. And since I'm zooming out, I might as well point out that 85% of the universe is dark matter. It's the stuff that holds our galaxies together, yet we basically don't understand it at all. So I think it's really not a leap to say that we are at the beginning. But let's limit ourselves for now to just the regular matter on planet Earth. Again, I only have an hour. What we do know is that what we have observed is just a small subset of what's possible. And as the Earth is warming, we're already starting to see this play out. You see headlines of the biggest floods, droughts, fires, bigger than we've ever seen in our period of observed records. And if we go back and look at the geologic record, we know that even bigger change is possible. These are pictures of boulders in the Snake River Plateau that were transported by a flood with a crest more than 410 feet tall, roughly 15,000 years ago in the last ice age. So yes, we do know that there is a big area outside what we've observed and what the Earth can do. But I want to point out that it's not just our greatest fears that live out there, the biggest catastrophes that we're worried about. It's also where our greatest hopes live. This is where our potential paths to better future will be found. So how can machine learning help? We certainly can use all the help we can get. Machine learning is really great at connecting dots, especially when there are a lot of dots. Think about the example of satellite observations. That's a lot of dots to connect. It's already revolutionizing this, and we can only expect it to get better. But what about this area out here, where we don't have so many dots? That's where our human intelligence does a really great job. We are excellent at imagining futures and at comprehending risks that go far beyond what we can simulate. And the better we understand the Earth, the better we are at imagining these futures. So am I saying that we should throw out machine learning or only use it in really specific cases? Definitely not. It is an incredibly powerful tool. The lens that machine learning can view the world through, this high-dimensional space, can reveal all sorts of things that we can't currently see. The point is that we can't just focus on getting better predictions. We have to find a way to learn new things together. There is no inherent problem if we start using neural networks to solve problems rather than our equations. The problem is if we stop progressing those equations. Our job is the same as it has always been. In fact, I would say it's more important than ever. We have to insist on knowing why. This is how we continue to build our story. It's a story that spans all of human civilization. It's so big that no one knows all of it, but we all know some of it. And those of us who are scientists dedicate ourselves to writing and revising it. It's how we got from Galileo to Edward Lorenz to all of you in the audience and all of us on this stage here tonight. And hopefully, it's how we'll get to many future generations to come. It's true, there's a ton we don't know. We are definitely at the beginning. And if history is any guide, we know that the biggest puzzle pieces we're missing today are probably not even ones we're looking for, and most likely will be found looking for something else entirely. But this is not a hopeless place to be. This is where we have always been. And we have a superpower. We know how to move forward from this place. You are here tonight because you are curious. It's the same curiosity that brought people to Faraday's lectures 150 years ago. It's what drove him and other scientists and all of us on this stage to keep digging. It's the heart of science, and we are nowhere without it. But it's just the spark. The flame is our collective story. If you were able to picture the Earth at the start of this lecture, or if you learned anything here tonight or in this series, then you're engaging in that story. And it's not just cool or interesting, a pause in your scrolling. This is fundamental. This is how we get from observations of crop failures in the 1600s to the discovery of fast winds in the upper atmosphere, to the fleet of satellites and numerical weather models that are making 10 quadrillion calculations 4 times a day to tell you if a hurricane is coming and keep you safe. And perhaps most importantly, in this moment, it's how we'll venture off into the unknown and live to tell about it.
Consider a candle. You know, you don't have to understand a candle to use it, but we do have to understand the science beneath a candle to make the next step. In fact, when hundreds of curious people were listening to 4 hours of Faraday's talks about candles, scientists were already laying the groundwork for a new form of light. That discovery was based on the fundamental, foundational science that underlies a candle. But it was different. We can say that perfect knowledge of a candle would not predict what was next.
Hang on. So consider the light bulb. A revolutionary technology based on centuries of basic science, but ultimately sparked by human curiosity. Consider the light bulb and imagine where our story will go next. Thank you for listening to our story. And now you can clap. Thank you.
Well, that one brought me to tears. So I think people often think of science as very methodical, but scientists are incredibly creative, and they are often very artful in their delivery. And that was one of the most artful approaches to delivering the importance of basic science. So let's thank Laura Condon and Hydrology and Atmospheric Sciences again. Wow, well, what a great series this year. I just want to say as we close the 2026 series, I want to thank you all for all of you who joined us on our journey over the last month or so. Your continued support of the science and the lecture series is deeply appreciated and allows us to continue to bring these important and very timely talks to the Southern Arizona community each spring. If you would like to watch any of these lectures, you can go to YouTube. They were live streamed, but there are also archived there. And I would ask you to please share these lectures and your love of science and your sense of the value of science. It's an important time to do that. Thank you again for being with us. Get home safely, and we look forward to seeing you next year.